All right, so today we're going to be taking a deep dive into the world of Iamblichus
Okay.
and his work De Mysteriis. Basically, this is a philosopher from late antiquity, like 4th century AD.
Okay.
And we've got these excerpts from a scholarly book that really digs deep into his ideas and practices, and especially how he differed from other thinkers of his time.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to be looking into some really fascinating stuff. Ancient rituals, divine possession, I mean, really interesting things.
Right.
So I guess the mission here is to uncover what exactly Iamblichus was exploring, what kinds of practices he was into, and how his view differed, like I said, from other thinkers and traditions of his time.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting time period. I mean, just to give a little context, Iamblichus lived during a time of major upheaval. This is the 4th century AD, remember, and traditional religions are facing challenges from both Christianity and this rising tide of philosophical skepticism.
Yeah, it was a real melting pot of ideas.
Absolutely. And Iamblichus found himself right in the thick of it. He really saw himself as a defender of these traditional religions, especially Egyptian and Chaldean traditions.
So he was kind of like saying, hold on, there's more to these traditions than meets the eye.
Right, exactly.
So who was this guy? Like, paint us a picture of Iamblichus. Who was he?
So Iamblichus, he was a Syrian philosopher,
Okay.
and he was really influenced by this system called Neoplatonism.
And Neoplatonism, that's basically like, it comes from the ideas of Plato, the ancient Greek philosopher.
Exactly. Neoplatonism emphasizes the existence of this supreme transcendent source of all being.
Okay.
And this idea that our souls are on this journey to reunite with that source.
I see. And so Iamblichus, he took those ideas and kind of ran with them.
He did. He really emphasized ritual practice and engaging with the divine in a way that hadn't been explored quite as deeply before.
So not your typical, like, toga-clad philosopher sitting around just thinking about stuff, huh?
Not exactly. He was deeply invested in defending his worldview, and he wasn't afraid to challenge those who disagreed.
I mean, from what I've read, this guy didn't mince words. He even called early Christians inept and preposterous.
Yeah, and that really highlights the tension that existed between these different belief systems at the time.
Yeah, wow. It's a good reminder that even these seemingly abstract philosophical debates can have real-world consequences.
Absolutely.
Now, you mentioned that his work, De Mysteriis, was actually written in response to a letter that one of his students received.
That's right.
So tell us a little bit more about that. Who wrote the letter? What was it about?
So Iamblichus had this student, Nebo, and Nebo received a letter from this philosopher, Porphyry.
Porphyry, and he was.
Also a pretty prominent figure in Neoplatonism. And, well, he was questioning some of the core beliefs that Iamblichus held dear.
Oh, so De Mysteriis was like Iamblichus's rebuttal.
Yeah, you could say that. It was, in part, a direct response to Porphyry's criticisms.
Okay, so like a philosophical duel. This is where it starts to get really juicy.
Yeah, I know, right?
So what were they disagreeing about? Like, what were some of the key points of contention?
One of the big things is this distinction between theurgy and magic.
Okay, theurgy versus magic. Now, what exactly did Iamblichus consider theurgy? Was it like a spiritual practice?
Yeah, definitely a spiritual practice. And for Iamblichus, it wasn't about casting spells or anything like that.
Okay.
It was about specific rituals and practices designed to achieve union with the divine. It wasn't just a quick fix, though.
Okay.
Think of it like, I don't know, tuning a radio to a specific frequency. You've got to find that sweet spot.
I see.
And that's what theurgy was all about for Iamblichus, aligning yourself with the divine frequencies, using rituals and practices to clear away static and interference.
So theurgy for him was more about cultivating a relationship with the divine, not about imposing your will on it.
Exactly.
Which is very different from like the typical Hollywood depiction of magic, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And for Iamblichus, that's exactly what magic was. It was all about manipulation, trying to force the divine to do your bidding.
I see.
And he believed that approach was not only ineffective, but potentially impious.
Impious meaning?
Like a kind of spiritual arrogance. Theurgy, on the other hand, required purity, humility, and a deep understanding of the divine order.
So he was really serious about this distinction.
Absolutely. There's a great anecdote in the book. Iamblichus is demonstrating his abilities.
Like what kind of abilities?
He actually invokes water spirits for his students. But even then, he warns them about the dangers of arrogance.
So he wasn't just showing off. He was trying to teach them a lesson about humility and respect for the divine. Okay, so this is where Iamblichus takes a really interesting turn. It says here that he drew on sources that were beyond typical Greek philosophy.
Yeah, this is one of the things that makes him so unique.
So what kinds of sources are we talking about here?
He was really into these ancient Chaldean and Egyptian wisdom traditions.
Yeah.
Okay, and these weren't exactly like mainstream in the philosophical circles of his day.
Definitely not. We're talking about texts like the Chaldean oracles, the Corpus Hermeticum.
Wow, it's like he was the scholar of the esoteric.
Yeah, you could say that. Venturing beyond the well-trodden paths of Athenian thought. I mean, relying on these, what were sometimes called barbarian sources. That must have raised some eyebrows back then, huh?
Absolutely. It was unusual and a little controversial for a philosopher of his stature.
Wow. But he was adamant that these traditions held these, like, deep truths about the universe and the divine.
Truths that were essential for understanding theurgy and its power.
Wow. So he was really pushing boundaries.
Definitely.
All right, now let's talk about divine possession. I mean, this is one of the most intriguing aspects of Iamblichus's work.
For sure.
The book mentions it as, like, a sign of true theurgy.
Right.
What exactly did Iamblichus have to say about this phenomenon? How does he think it worked? Well, he describes all sorts of signs, like altered states of consciousness, visions, auditory experiences, even physical manifestations.
So we're not talking about just someone zoning out for a minute.
Definitely not. He was very clear that true divine possession wasn't just some kind of psychological state or, like, hysteria.
Okay.
It was a genuine connection with the divine, a result of divine grace, not human manipulation.
Wow, that's intense. And he actually believed this was possible. Like, did he give any examples?
Oh, yeah, he does. And they're vivid. He talks about this intangible and incorporeal spirit that makes this whooshing sound when it enters someone.
That's wild. Like, imagine witnessing that. It gives me chills just thinking about it. But, I mean, how did Iamblichus distinguish this true divine possession from someone just making stuff up?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Right.
And he really emphasized the importance of discernment.
Okay.
True divine possession was characterized by specific signs, like a certain level of knowledge or wisdom that couldn't be faked.
I see. It wasn't just about the outward appearances.
Exactly. It was about an inner transformation that came with this genuine connection with the divine.
Okay, so we talked about the divine possession and those controversial sources that Iamblichus drew upon. But what about the role of symbols and rituals? I mean, those seem to be central to his system.
Absolutely. He believed that they were much more than just symbolic gestures. They acted as conduits for divine power. And this is where that distinction between the Freudian magic comes back in. Remember, he rejected those magical practices that sought to manipulate or coerce divine beings.
So it's about using those symbols with respect, with the right intention, not for personal gain.
Precisely. There's this fascinating example in the book, The Boat of the Sun God.
Okay.
And Iamblichus interpreted it allegorically, suggesting it represented, like, the governance of the cosmos.
Wow. So he's not just accepting these symbols at face value, he's looking for those deeper layers of meaning.
Exactly. He's connecting them to his understanding of the universe as a whole.
Fascinating. Now, before we move on to his debate with Porphyry, is there anything else about his views that we should touch on?
Yes, we need to talk about purification.
Purification, okay.
He constantly stressed the importance of ritual purity.
And by that, he meant...
Well, it was more than just physical cleanliness. He believed that purification involved cleansing the soul.
like an inner cleansing.
Right. It meant letting go of, negative emotions, attachments, anything that might hinder your spiritual progress.
So like creating a clear channel for divine energy to flow through.
That's a great way to put it. Purification was about making space for the divine, refining your being to become a worthy vessel.
Okay, so we've got this like multifaceted picture of Iamblichus, the defender of tradition, the scholar who wasn't afraid to push boundaries, the believer in divine possession. It's incredible. You can really feel his passion for defending those ancient traditions. Now, I'm ready to see how he squared off against Porphyry in this philosophical battle of the minds.
All right, let's dive in.
Welcome back. And it's amazing to think, after all these centuries, we're still grappling with the same questions that Iamblichus and Porphyry were wrestling with.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
Back in the 4th century. Their ideas, they didn't just fade away.
Not at all.
They've had this ripple effect through time, influencing everything from like mystical traditions to religious practices,
Right.
even modern philosophy. So I guess their debate, it was more than just like a philosophical sparring match.
Yeah, it really was.
It reflected this fundamental tension that runs through, I think, all of human history.
I think you're right.
Between reason and revelation, the intellectual and the experiential, the material and the spiritual. It's like they were both trying to map the territory of the soul, but using very different tools.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
So I guess before we get too lost in the weeds here,
Yeah.
let's bring it back to our listener. Why should they care about this, ancient debate? What's the relevance of Iamblichus and Porphyry for our lives today?
Well, I think there are a few key takeaways from both of these thinkers that are really relevant for us in the 21st century.
Okay, lay it on us. Iamblichus and Porphyry. Wisdom for the modern mind.
All right, so first and foremost, Iamblichus, he reminds us that spirituality isn't just about ideas.
Oh.
It's about lived experience.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just contemplate these things intellectually. We need to engage in practices that connect us directly with the divine.
So he's calling for a more embodied spirituality.
Exactly.
One that integrates all the dimensions of our being. Physical, emotional, spiritual.
Right. It's not just about reading about spiritual experiences. It's about having them.
I think that's such a powerful message for our, increasingly digital world,
Yeah.
where we spend so much time in our heads disconnected from our bodies.
Right. Iamblichus is reminding us that we're not just minds floating around. We are embodied souls. We have the capacity to experience the divine through our senses, through our emotions, through our actions.
Okay, that's great. What else?
Well, he also reminds us about the importance of ritual and symbolism. Those things aren't just arbitrary.
Okay.
They're gateways to deeper levels of meaning and experience.
I mean, in a world that's constantly rushing,
Right.
multitasking, always seeking instant gratification, I think we've lost touch with the power of ritual and ceremony.
I agree. And in a world that's increasingly secular, Iamblichus's emphasis on ritual and symbolism feels especially relevant.
Yeah.
He's reminding us that we can create those moments of transcendence, even in the midst of the mundane.
It's about bringing more intentionality into our lives, right?
It is.
Creating that sacred space and time for connecting with the divine.
Exactly.
And, it doesn't have to be anything elaborate. Even simple things like, I don't know, lighting a candle with intention or just setting aside time for quiet reflection.
Yeah, those things can make a big difference.
Absolutely. Now, what about purification? We talked about that before.
Right.
What was Iamblichus's take on that?
Well, he reminds us that spiritual growth, it's not just about knowledge or techniques.
Okay.
It's about purifying our being.
Yeah.
Letting go of those negative patterns, those attachments that hold us back.
It's about doing the inner work, right?
It is.
It's so easy to get caught up in all the spiritual theories and practices, but the real transformation happens when we do that deeper work.
Absolutely. And Iamblichus believed that true transformation required this commitment to ongoing purification, like a willingness to confront our own limitations, to strive for greater alignment with the divine.
Okay, so we've got embodied spirituality, ritual, purification. Any other gems from Iamblichus?
Yes, his emphasis on the diversity of the divine.
Okay.
He reminds us that it's not just, this abstract oneness, but this vibrant tapestry of energies and beings, and each one has its own unique qualities, its own powers.
Yeah, he was a real champion of spiritual diversity way before it was cool.
He was. He believed that there were many paths up the mountain, and every individual, they have to find their own unique way.
I love that. Okay, so we've got a good sense of Iamblichus's key takeaways, but what about Porphyry? Any insights from him that are still relevant today?
Oh, absolutely. Iamblichus might get more attention for his emphasis on theurgy,
Yeah.
but Porphyry's contributions to Neoplatonism, they're equally important.
So what are some of Porphyry's key ideas that we should highlight?
Well, his emphasis on intellectual and philosophical contemplation, that was huge.
Okay.
He believed that true spiritual understanding, it required a rigorous effort, a willingness to question our assumptions, to really grapple with those big questions of existence.
So he's reminding us that spirituality isn't just about feeling good or having mystical experiences.
Right.
It's also about using our minds
It is.
to understand the nature of reality
Yes.
and our place in the cosmos.
He was advocating for a more contemplative approach to spirituality.
That's interesting. So it's not just about theurgy and ritual.
Right. He also believed that true spiritual growth wasn't just about accumulating knowledge or having mystical experiences. It was about living a life of integrity
Okay.
and compassion. Our actions speak louder than words.
Yeah.
True spiritual transformation requires a commitment to ethical living.
It's easy to get lost in all the theories and practices, but ultimately, It's about how we live our lives, right?
Absolutely.
How we treat ourselves and how we treat others.
Right. And I think another one of Porphyry's insights that's really relevant for us today is his critique of materialism and consumerism.
Oh, okay.
He believed that excessive attachment to material possessions was a distraction
Yeah.
from true spiritual values,
Okay.
and that a simpler, more mindful way of life was really essential for spiritual growth.
He sounds a bit like a modern-day minimalist.
Yeah, he was definitely ahead of his time. He recognized that true happiness and fulfillment don't come from accumulating things. They come from cultivating inner peace and connecting with something larger than ourselves.
Wow, some really valuable insights from Porphyry there.
I think so.
Intellectual contemplation, ethical living, a critique of materialism.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty amazing that these ideas developed centuries ago are still so relevant today.
It is.
Both Iamblichus and Porphyry, they offer us this timeless wisdom that can help us navigate the complexities of modern life
I agree.
and find meaning and purpose in a world that's often, confusing and overwhelming.
Absolutely.
Welcome back, and it really feels like we've been on this incredible journey through time,
It really has.
exploring this world of Iamblichus and Porphyry.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to consider that these ideas, born centuries ago, still have so much to offer us today.
Absolutely. It speaks to the enduring power of their work.
Yeah.
They weren't just these ivory tower philosophers. They were grappling with these fundamental questions about the human condition,
Exactly.
the nature of the divine, the relationship between the material and the spiritual realms.
Yeah, the potential for human transformation, all this stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
So in this last part of our deep dive, let's explore how influential their ideas actually became.
Okay.
I mean, what happened to their work after they were gone? Did it just gather dust on a shelf somewhere, or did it have a lasting impact?
Oh, their ideas, they didn't fade away at all. It's like they planted these seeds that continued to sprout and grow throughout history.
I like that analogy.
Yeah, so let's start with Iamblichus. His work was really influential on later Neoplatonists, like Proclus.
Okay.
He really systematized and expanded upon a lot of Iamblichus's ideas.
So Iamblichus wasn't just some footnote in the history of philosophy. He actually shaped the way later thinkers understood this whole system.
Exactly. His emphasis on the Theurgy, his cosmology, his understanding of the relationship between the one and the many, it was all incredibly influential. But his influence extended beyond just academic philosophy.
Okay, so where else did his ideas take root?
Well, think about his emphasis on ritual practice that found a home in various mystical and magical traditions that emerged over the centuries. You can almost think of the arrogance as like a spiritual toolbox filled with all these techniques, for purification, invocation, connecting with divine energies. And those tools were picked up and adapted by later practitioners,
Okay.
from medieval alchemists to Renaissance magicians.
Hold on, alchemists. Like the guys trying to turn lead into gold? What does that have to do with Iamblichus?
Well, it's all about transformation.
Okay.
That process of trying to transmute lead into gold, for them it was a metaphor for spiritual transformation.
I see.
It was about purifying the soul, shedding those limitations, achieving a higher state of being.
So they weren't just messing around in the lab.
Right.
There was this deeper philosophical and spiritual dimension to their work.
Absolutely.
I'm starting to see how Iamblichus's ideas about theology, aligning yourself with these cosmic forces, purifying the soul, could really influence them.
Oh, for sure. Alchemy, at its core, was as much about inner transformation as it was about outer transformation. And Iamblichus, his ideas definitely played a role there.
So we've got alchemists using Iamblichus's ideas to pursue spiritual gold. What about those Renaissance magicians? Were they, conjuring spirits in his name?
Not exactly in his name,
Okay.
but they were drawing from similar sources. Remember how Iamblichus believed that the universe was just teeming with these divine beings,
Yeah,
each with its own specific powers and characteristics?
right.
Well, those Renaissance magicians, they drew on Hermetic and Neoplatonic texts, and they developed these elaborate systems of correspondences.
Correspondences.
Yeah, between planets, elements, spiritual entities. Like they were creating these intricate maps of the cosmos, trying to understand those hidden connections between everything.
It's like they were decoding the language of the universe.
Exactly. And they believed that by understanding those correspondences, they could actually tap into the power of those spiritual forces and influence events in the world. Bring about healing, offer protection, that sort of thing.
Wow. So Iamblichus's influence is woven into the fabric of Western esotericism.
Yes.
It's incredible. It's like his ideas went underground for centuries, only to reemerge in these often misunderstood traditions.
You're right, and I think a lot of people might dismiss these traditions as a bit fringe.
Yeah.
But at their core, they're grappling with the same questions that Iamblichus was exploring.
Right, right.
It all comes back to the nature of the divine, the interplay between the material and the spiritual, and our potential for transformation.
Okay, so we've traced Iamblichus's influence through those mystical and magical traditions, even on later philosophers. But what about mainstream religious thought? Did his ideas ever make their way into organized religion?
Yeah, that's where things get a little more complicated. Iamblichus's theurgy might seem a world away from organized religion,
Yeah.
but there are some interesting points of connection, particularly his concept of ritual purification.
Okay.
Remember how much he emphasized the importance of purifying the soul and body before engaging in any kind of spiritual practice?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that idea really resonates with practices found in many different religious traditions.
Like what?
Well, think about baptism in Christianity or ritual ablutions in Islam. Even though the specifics might be different, there's this shared understanding of the need to cleanse ourselves, both physically and spiritually.
Right, to prepare ourselves for that connection with the divine.
Exactly. And it's not just about outward cleanliness, it's about an inner transformation, shedding those impurities, turning towards the sacred.
Yeah, it's a universal concept.
It is.
Okay, so that's fascinating. Any other unexpected connections between Iamblichus's ideas and, religious thought?
Well, his ideas about the power of symbols and imagery to evoke spiritual experiences, that's another one.
Okay.
Think about the use of religious icons, statues, those symbolic representations in so many different faiths.
Yeah.
They're not meant to be worshipped as objects themselves.
Right, right.
They serve as focal points for contemplation, for connecting with the divine.
It's about using those physical representations to kind of focus our attention, connect us with deeper truths, maybe even act as conduits for divine energy.
Exactly. And that concept really aligns with Iamblichus's views on the role of symbols and rituals in the Urgic practice.
So even though he was writing centuries ago, some of his core ideas are still very much alive in the world today.
They are?
It's like the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Yeah, that's true.
So I guess the big question is, are Iamblichus's ideas still relevant in today's world? Can we, like in the 21st century, still find value in the teachings of a philosopher who lived over 1600 years ago?
I absolutely think so. In fact, I'd argue that his ideas are even more relevant now than ever.
Really? Why is that?
Well, we live in a world that's increasingly secular, materialistic, and disconnected from the sacred.
That's true.
And Iamblichus's emphasis on an embodied, experiential spirituality, that offers a powerful antidote to the spiritual emptiness that a lot of people are feeling.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
So how can we bring these, ancient ideas into our modern lives? What are some practical steps that our listeners can take to connect with Iamblichus's teachings?
Well, there are lots of ways. We can cultivate a more embodied spirituality by spending time in nature, moving our bodies, creating beauty in our surroundings.
So it's about being present in our bodies, intentional with our actions,
Yeah.
creating space for the sacred in our daily lives.
Exactly.
Okay. What else?
We can also explore the world of symbols and archetypes,
Yeah.
read myths, meditate on symbolic imagery, pay attention to the patterns that emerge in our dreams and experiences.
It's like we can use our imaginations to unlock that hidden wisdom within ourselves.
Yes. And finally, we can embrace that idea of purification, both internal and external, finding practices that cleanse our bodies and minds, cultivating virtues, letting go of those negative patterns that keep us stuck.
It's about recognizing that spiritual transformation is a process, an ongoing journey of refinement and alignment with the divine. Well, this has been an incredible exploration of Iamblichus and his enduring legacy. We've journeyed from the philosophical debates of late antiquity to the modern quest for meaning and purpose, and it's clear that Iamblichus and Porphyry, they still have so much to offer us. They offer this timeless wisdom that can guide us on our own spiritual paths.
Absolutely.
So to you, our listener, we encourage you to delve deeper into their world,
Yeah.
explore their writings, experiment with their practices, and discover for yourself the transformative power of their ideas. Until next time, keep seeking, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.